Welcome everyone. Just as people are joining us and just before we start the formal part of today's webinar, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many lands upon which we're meeting in Australia, Japan and elsewhere. Here in Canberra, the traditional owners are the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'm Veronica Taylor, and on behalf of the AJBCC, we're really delighted to be partnered today with our member organisation, The Dream Collective, for today's webinar, Bridging the Gap Between Intent and Action. The catalyst for this webinar was a conversation with Dream Collective founder, Sarah Liu, about new data that she and her team had generated on attitudes to gender equality in Japan and Australia. That ties very closely to AJBCC work on gender diversity and inclusion. So we're really looking forward to today's conversation. I'd like to turn over now to our moderator for today, Natsumi Funabiki, to introduce the Dream Collective and their work, and also to introduce and welcome our panelists for today. Thank you, Natsumi.
Thank you so much, Veronica, for the warm welcome. Let me share my screen to go over a bit of the overview of some of the insights that we want to share with you today. So bear with me while I get that up. And hi everyone again, thank you for joining today's webinar. We're really delighted to have this opportunity together with the AJBCC and have all of you here with us live today. I've just got my screen up just now here. Here we go. Okay, I believe it's just loading right now. So today's webinar, Bridging the Gap Between Intent and Action. Before we get into our really exciting discussion today, I'd like to share a little bit about the Dream Collective first, for those of you who might be new to knowing more about us. We are a global diversity, equity and inclusion consultancy. We're headquartered in Sydney, Australia. We work predominantly in the APAC region and beyond, and now we've operated in over 18 countries at the moment. Our core focus when we say diversity is around gender diversity, really reeling in that intersectionality part and leading into other realms of diversity as well. Our core mission as an organization is to help businesses solve 3 problems. That's attracting, retaining, and advancing their female talent through advisory, through training, as well as branding partnerships as well. A bit of a self-introduction. I'm Natsumi from the Dream Collective. I'm the client lead here and lead the Japan market, as well as leading the conversations across our APAC global partners as well. I'm delighted to be joined today by 2 wonderful speakers. Let me introduce Graeme first. Graeme, the CEO for APAC for Fujitsu Australia. He's had an integral role in leading the digital transformation and the growth of Fujitsu across the region. Really excited to hear his insights into our research as well as gender equality as well. Our second guest is Andrew Gauci from Lendlease Japan, the Managing Director for Lendlease Japan. He's had a key role in the diversification and the rapid growth for Lendlease during his leadership in Japan. So today we really have a good opportunity to get the Australian market perspective as well as the Japan market perspective, really lean into what we can do more to further engage men into the conversation around gender equity. As Veronica kindly mentioned before, I'd like to share a little bit about our research and some of the highlight points that we'll be covering here today. What we've seen from some of the research that we've conducted in late 2021, we did a research, quite a unique one of its kind, around male sentiment of gender diversity, both in the Japanese and Australian markets as well. We talked a lot about cultivating allyship and how we can deliberately and actively engage men into the gender equity conversation. The reality is, you can see from some of these numbers here, is that many businesses still focus on the women and minority groups for their DEI initiatives, but there's a big need and also impact that we can create when we equip men to join the conversation and actively engage in them as well. From the research that we've done, I'd like to go through the top 5 highlights from our research before I open up the floor and have that discussion with Graeme and Andrew as well. So the first one is around diversity fatigue. So of those surveyed, 34% from Japan and 48% of Australian men felt fatigued from gender equality issues. So we can see that, especially for Australia, it's quite a significant number, and we'd like to go into that into detail within the discussion as well. The second point is around reverse discrimination. So we talk a lot about gender equality, and a lot of people talk about, okay, what can we do for the women? How can we really support organizations in attracting, retaining, advancing their female talent? There's a sentiment in this that there is reverse discrimination happening for men, 42% for Japan and 50% for Australia. So both quite high numbers in this, and the sentiment around this is quite high. The third topic here is around ownership. So a large portion of both markets feel that gender equality initiatives are simply not their responsibility. So there's a bit of a lack of a responsibility factor there, the ownership and connection towards what they can really do to achieve gender equality in this space. The fourth one is, what is the primary driver for men to engage in these gender equality conversations? For Japan, it was incentive, and for Australia, it was obligation. So this is quite interesting, seeing the cultural nuances there and the differences there as well. So we'll tackle this in our discussion as well. Finally, the last data point that I wanted to share was around impact. So 27% of Japanese men and 25% of Australian men surveyed felt that they had no impact in gender equality and within their organization in creating change, inspiring, motivating their colleagues. So it's interesting to see this factor around that ownership segment and the fact that they see little impact in their roles. So this is something that we definitely want to see change in, want to cultivate a discussion around, and we'll really dive into this in the discussion today. That's a quick highlight from some of the fascinating insights from the research that we've conducted. You'll also be able to download the full report from both markets as well from our website if you'd like to really look into the numbers and more of the data there as well. Now, I'll stop sharing my screen here and dive straight into our discussion. So I'll welcome Andrew and Graeme back into the conversation. Are you both all good? Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, so you might find for the audience as well, a poll question coming through to you, as well as a Q&A box there. So we'll be moderating and leading the discussion here. We'd also like to hear from you in terms of any questions that you might have, any comments around the discussion points that we have. So feel free to pop those in and we'll get to them throughout the conversation as well. Yes. So I might just kick off with asking you both around, what are your initial thoughts, feelings around some of the research insights? Did anything surprise you? Was anything quite a key point for you? I might start with Graeme, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Natsumi, and thank you very much, Veronica, and thank you everybody for coming along today. I'm delighted to be here to talk about a very, very important topic to me that I'm passionate about and that Fujitsu is passionate about in the context of our purpose, and that is diversity. Today we're talking a lot about gender diversity, but diversity in all its different aspects is very, very important to us. To your question though, Natsumi, I found it's interesting to see that men in Australia generally believe their workplace is allowing them to be more focused on gender issues, and the workplace is starting to feel more inclusive. That's very, very important. If we don't create an environment of leaders of organizations where people feel safe and feel that inclusion is part of the corporate structure and values, then we are going to struggle to get change happening at the grassroots with people who are represented by the two different genders. Here at Fujitsu, very early on in my tenure, I decided that the best way to improve diversity between the genders, and we actually have a stated goal to be a gender balance by 2026, which is a very big goal in an industry, the IT industry generally, and broadly STEM, that does not have that level of representation. So in order to get people thinking about that and feel part of the journey that we're on, I thought it was very, very important to set up employee advisory groups that represent a whole bunch of non-included groups. But the biggest one that we have is the Gender Diversity Employee Advisory Group. And I felt that what was important was to have a man and a woman co-chair. And we went out and sought amongst the men in the organisation, particularly at a relatively senior management level, those who felt compelled to help accelerate the gender diversity journey. And we put the person we found on the committee alongside a woman who was passionate about gender diversity as well. And that really sent a clear message to the organisation that we're going to look at both sides of the gender discussion. And it's always important to me here at Fujitsu in Australia, where I'm sat at the moment, but across Asia, that we continue to facilitate an environment for safe discussions, continue to facilitate an environment where people who are from different backgrounds, or in this case, different genders, can hear the story of the other side. The old adage that you walk a mile in another person's shoes to understand their journey. I think just walking a metre would be a good start. So very, very important that we create an environment as an organisation so where we can have these discussions, we can learn. And some of the results of the survey didn't surprise me, because I do hear anecdotally that a lot of men are threatened by the focus on gender diversity. They should not feel threatened. And when I speak to men about this in many a different forum, and also women, I just put it down to the simple fact that as an organisation serving society, if we are not truly representative of that society, we then don't have a valid opportunity to create change in the society. And for me, at the highest level, excluding ourselves from 50% of the population, 51% of the population, depending which country you're in, is just plain crazy. So wherever I get an opportunity, I'm very eager to explore the journey to more equality. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Graeme. And I think what you touched about making sure that there is that equal representation, visibility, and intentionality around that as well, I think is really key. Like you said, it's really important to make sure that the employees see that is the message and vision that organizations are portraying out there as well. And, seeing from some of the survey responses that people did in the poll, I think, if you total it, about 75% were surprised or surprised to some degree. So, I think some of them you go at that go, oh, reverse discrimination seems to be a big sentiment or things like that. But we really want to unpack today, what are some of the barriers there? What are some of the ways that we can really engage everybody into the gender equality conversation? Because it's not just about what can we do for women, but actually a more human issue and more holistic issue there as well. So I might ask Andrew as well about some of your initial insights, highlights, anything that you were surprised about with the research findings.
Thanks, Natsumi, and thanks to the AJBCC for setting this up. Again, like Graeme, it's an important topic to me. I'm not surprised by the results. The survey results. I think there's your in-depth findings are good to read as well, because there's a lot more behind those numbers. I find there is just there's a surface level understanding, but there's not a deep understanding of the issue, and this is I think this is something that we need to resolve. And until we resolve it, Japan will be still ranked as 115th or whatever it is at its present day in terms of gender equality. You're still going to see a small percentage of women in senior positions until there's a true understanding of what the issue is. And I don't think that's happening. And you could see, you know, you're 25%, 27% of people still think they can't do anything. There are real issues. There are unacceptable issues. There's unfairness. You know, I'll give an example. I years ago promoted a woman into a senior leadership role here, and she refused to take the role. And I said, why? And her reason to me was her husband could not accept that her salary was going to be higher than hers. I had another case where we had a situation where someone didn't want to disclose their position online because the other mothers in the neighborhood would see that she was a senior person and therefore not giving enough time to her children. So these are real issues. And until we address them and have men actually walk in the shoes of women, I don't think it's going to get resolved quickly enough. So our role as leaders, and I do believe it has to be driven from top down, is to create pathways for understanding so that there is a lot more people understanding what the issues are and the impacts of those issues. And we need men to understand that their salaries, their opportunities will actually be determined negatively because their business won't be as successful as others because it's not as diverse as others. So they need to understand this. I mean, if you actually have people understand that they themselves are not being fair, that they themselves are not doing the right thing, they will act. But until they understand that, you know, it's not going to change. And I think some of that's reflected in the results. And so, you know, our mission or my mission as a leader is to make sure as much as possible I create as many pathways as possible. People see me in doing that, and then they start creating those pathways as well.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, what you talked about in terms of that surface level understanding and actually creating that accountability ownership around that is really key. Some of the topics that you you know, referred to are very specific to Japan. I think in terms of those ingrained gender roles, it's very difficult to talk about advancement for females sometimes, because it's actually not just, you know, it not happening, but actually them, like you said, refusing to take that or not wanting to put their hand up. So there are some specific issues, I think, in Japan around that you know, there's a lot that we need to do for that. I'm also, you know, from some of the points that you raised, Andrew and Graeme as well, you know, in the survey research, so Australian men were found more likely than Japanese men to feel fatigued by the notion of gender equality. So there was some data suggesting that they thought that men and women are treated equally, that men, you know, suffer from reverse discrimination. I might throw to you, Graeme, for this question first, but how do you think leaders and organizations as well can reduce that fatigue and engage men into gender equality initiatives more effectively going forward?
Yeah, thanks, Natsumi. And I can understand that, and particularly coming out of the COVID crisis, where here in Australia and in many parts of the world, and particularly in Asia Pacific, there was fairly severe lockdowns where people had a whole lot of things coming at them that was unexpected and a lot of things out of their control. What we learned through that was collaboration, which has always been something we've been very focused on in the IT industry, and I've been focused on in my career, became much more important. The idea that you can push top down rather dramatic social changes, and even though I was listening with interest to Andrew's point there about the woman who was not confident to talk about her role amongst other women, and you talked about that sounding like a very Japanese thing. Just 4 short years ago in Australia, I had a senior woman who was a managing director of a $200 million business. I promoted her, and she would get a lot of criticism at the school gate when dropping off her children in the morning, albeit quickly, not hanging around and having coffees and chatting with the other mothers. So that's still evident here, where we think in Australia we're a lot more diverse and inclusive. So it's an ongoing issue. And I think back to my point, you need to collaborate, you need to team, and you can't be doing the top down when it comes to social change or change that quite frankly, for a lot of men who don't understand the fundamental importance of equality and understand the benefit that women can bring to an organisation and to a business, you get a fear of the unknown. So as I said before, having men and women on diversity councils, men and women informing us as leaders of what makes sense and what journey they'd collectively like to go on helps immensely. The other thing that we're trying to do is, where we can, show that equality cuts both ways. So we have, here at Fujitsu, recently adjusted our parenting leave. It was called maternity leave. I couldn't believe that when I arrived 18 months ago. We changed that to parenting leave, and we now have a principal carer leave that matches what used to be maternity leave. And then we also have the extra carer leave as well. So we've gone non-gender specific. We've tried to help change some of those, or address some of the big cultural and structural issues that exist in our society. It wasn't long ago that the gender stereotypes were ingrained in society. And I would say that they're still a long way from being affected. And a lot of men in the sort of middle to older age group grew up with very clear gender stereotypes, and they have been conditioned over a long time to be in a position that is very different to what is being counselled now. So we have to understand where they've come from on the journey and where we are going as an organisation, and be inclusive and start to talk in terms that don't reinforce gender stereotypes and allow people to be who they want to be and go on the journey at the same time. From a tech point of view as well, as I alluded to before, if we don't get more women interested in STEM, and it's not just women, it's girls in primary school and secondary school coming into STEM and making a difference to society through technology, we all fail. So we're doing things, in the interest of time, I want to give Andrew some space here. We're doing a lot culturally in the organisation, but reaching out to the ecosystem as well. We've just kicked off a program where we're going to be working with secondary schools to try and get girls, and not just girls, but girls from mixed backgrounds, Indigenous backgrounds, etc., into what would be an early pathway to a career or future in tech and science. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Graeme. And I think those specific examples that you raised in the Australian context as well, around the fact that maybe some of the examples that Andrew shared about Japan aren't just very Japanese issues, but quite a global issue. And that's what we hear a lot when we're working in this APAC market. Sometimes people say Japan is very known for ranking 121st in the World Economic Forum, all of that, but it's actually, we still have very similar systemic issues ingrained around gender identities, gender roles, and it's about really having a collaborative discussion around it. I think today as well, sharing those perspectives is really insightful to people from both backgrounds and all backgrounds as well. You mentioned, the fact that you have to change the economy itself, and a lot of people sometimes go, we need a bigger share of the pie, but it's actually, the pie is too small right now. So we need to really make sure that we make it bigger. We, collaborate together. Diversity isn't necessarily, this company is doing better than this company. Actually, how can we collaborate more to make more of that social impact together? So really great points, Graeme, and I think a lot of great insights from there. I might pass to Andrew on the insights specific to the Japanese research, actually, around Japanese men actually thinking that female disadvantage is due more to their own drive and motivation. Gender equality, it's not their responsibility. And sometimes we had some data also that showed that some people think that they can actually do more harm than good. So how do you think, what are some ways or examples that we can shift the narrative to overcome perceptions like this, do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think one of the things I've found is that the reason some Japanese men think that way is they kind of they've become numb to some of the messaging, which comes back to a little bit about what Graeme spoke about before. And I think the messaging is very important. You do get fatigue. So people talk about sustainability, they talk about gender equality, they talk about topics which everybody knows are right, but the same messages come through, and it's just ticking the box that it's a corporate thing to say, and it's not getting through. And we've got to understand that it is not getting through. And therefore, Japanese men will have these misconceptions. So how do we get them to understand, right? And how can we improve things? So one of the initiatives that we have, which we call Ignite, and I think it's a great program. There's mentoring and there's coaching, and then there's sponsoring, and they're very, very different. Very, very different. A coaching is, giving someone direction. Mentoring is really sort of listening and helping people through, difficulties or providing advice and all that sort of stuff. But what we don't do, and what we can do as organizations better, is promote sponsoring. And what that means in Lendlease is I will have a talented woman who may not have access to the right opportunities in the business. I have been at Lendlease for 20 years. I've been an executive at Lendlease for some time. I have influence. I can create pathways. So if you can have people sponsor people and then get to know their network, get to know the issues that they have, the capabilities that they have, then you can sponsor that person and provide new and opportunities which give them a chance to rise, and that will change the makeup of the organization as a whole. You will have more women at higher levels because the pathways have been created. Now, Japanese men need to understand, just like any men need to understand, the depth of the issue. And when you start sponsoring somebody, it really hits you in the face, like the things that we don't understand. Now, you said Japanese men, think that I think I saw in the survey that Japanese men feel that women don't have the drive or aren't keen to move forward. How can you have the drive or be keen to move forward when it's embarrassing to say that you've been promoted, or it's embarrassing to say that your salary is higher than your husband? Of course, it's a disincentive. So, we've got to get them to walk in the shoes so they understand that there is a lack of fairness. It's not a level playing field. And if it's not a level playing field, they need to play a part in changing it. And once you get that depth of understanding, things start to happen. This may be sort of controversial, I guess. I'm a big believer in quota and setting quota. So, I think it works in sustainability. We've got by 2025, Lendlease is going to be fully carbon neutral. Great, right? It's a clear objective that if we don't reach, people are not going to hit their bonuses. Similarly, if there's not a certain number of women in executive and management roles, then bonuses don't happen. Then we get impacted at the bottom line. So I think creating quotas provides opportunities that wouldn't have been provided if that quota hadn't been in place. So as I said, there's probably two things that I'm big on, having those quotas in place, but I think more importantly is getting a depth of understanding, and that depth of understanding really does come through doing things like sponsorship, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew. And that's actually a key focus for us as well when we're working in the DEI space. What we say is that women tend to get over-mentored and under-sponsored. There's a lot of advice and support and places to share, connect with each other. But actually, it's about how do we action that? How do we create spaces and influence that can support them to advance? And that's really something that the current leadership teams can do. So it's great to hear, Andrew, that you are very much involved in that sponsorship process. That's really good to hear. I can see that we've gotten a question from the audience as well, and I'd encourage all of you listening in live to use this opportunity to ask questions as well. This person is touching on something that Graeme, you mentioned around some men feeling threatened by gender diversity and related initiatives sometimes. Would you have any examples or comments for how this has been handled in the past, and in instances of men saying that they're threatened, and as a woman, how could we best respond to men who feel threatened by gender diversity? I'd love to hear your thoughts, Graeme.
Thanks very much for that. A couple of things, and again, it's interesting. I'll refer to Andrew's comments. I had heard the idea put forward by men who felt threatened that women didn't have the same drive nor organisational skills. And when I heard that, I just referred the men to either their mothers and how they organise their lives, and if they're fathers, how their wives or significant other organise the lives of the children. And then all of a sudden, little lights go off. I talked about drive. I asked if there were any men in the room who had younger sisters, and asked them to reflect on how the younger sister had to compete for time with the parents against an older brother, as an example. And then, you know, I'm very interested in the power of stories and shared experience. And I think as a leader, there's a combination of what I said before, where we have to create a safe environment where people can collaborate and understand each other's point of view and journey. But there's certainly things that we can do to set the right example. Here at Fujitsu, we, very early days in my tenure, we looked at the gender pay gap, which is something that's talked about a lot in Australia, but not acted on too much, unfortunately. But generally in technology, there's a gender pay gap of about 13% in Australia and 9% in New Zealand in favour of men for the same job. So here at Fujitsu, we did a complete evaluation. We found that we were about 4%. So not bad by industry standards, but still skewed towards men, again, for the same role. So I told everyone we were going to take a leadership position in tech, and we were going to get that right. I got a lot of cynical men coming at me about that. And what we found out, that in some circumstances, there were men who were disadvantaged as well, and we right-sized their salary. So creating an environment that says we're taking a policy stance that is leading as a business leader, but then saying where a policy shows up anomalies on both sides of whatever, you know, when you're in a two-party scenario that shows up anomalies on both sides, you'll rectify both. That was very, and it wasn't contrived, it was just a statement of facts. That was very powerful in convincing men that we were serious about real structural reform. And then, of course, I go back to something I said before. Well, not of course, in fact, we're all on a bit of a learning journey here. I go back to what I said before about the advisory groups. We make sure that they're truly representative, not only of gender, but culture as well. Also, the not just gender in a sort of binary sense, but gender fluidity as well. We're exploring that area, and where there's intersectionality between all of the different things that affect a person's life journey. So again, an open environment, creating organizational safety, and when you see fear and where you hear uncertainty, just addressing it head on in the context of an organization that's living its values.
Thank you so much, Graeme, for that. And I think some of the things that you mentioned around, you know, building up that environment for psychologically safe conversations, discussions is really key to make sure that, you know, everybody is able to be their true self and really bring up those topics that are, you know, they're finding as challenges in the workplace environment. That's very key to make cultural change and to make the shifts around that as well. I can see that the Q&A box is becoming quite active, so that's really great to see. I might touch on Ayumi's question that we've just gotten. And I'll pass this to you, Andrew, because I know that, you know, we talked a little bit about quotas and kind of setting those targets. You know, in order to promote gender equality, you know, Japan needs to make more token appointments is a question, but there's always discussions whether it's an equal approach, and, you know, what are your thoughts around that kind of movement, and I guess the conversation around setting quotas as well.
Yeah, and it's a good question. You know, the response I get from my Japanese executive team when I say this is what we're doing in terms of quotas is, that's not fair. It shouldn't be based on a quota. It should be purely based on the ability to execute on a particular role, and therefore this person should get the job, and it should have no relevance to the gender. That would be fine if it was a level playing field to start from, and it's not. So if it's not a level playing field, you need to make it a level playing field. And so the opportunities that some of them were given, some of the guys were given, have not been given to some of the women. And therefore, it isn't a level playing field. So the only way to create a level playing field today, in today's world, in the real world that we live in today, is to create spots, opportunities, and then provide. You can't have someone rise up into a position and then not have the support around them to be able to execute, right? So you need to identify talent. And let's say, we're 50-50 men and women in terms of talent. There should be 50-50%, men and women in management roles. So therefore, the talent is there. So how do you actually extract that talent and give it the opportunity to blossom and to be able to take those roles? So that process of elevation through the organization needs clarity. So what do you need to be in this particular role? And how do we provide the education and the support for those people to actually get into that role and then deliver that role? Now, if we've identified the talent, but that person hasn't had the opportunities to rise up through the organization because of gender equality issues in Japan, then we're going to raise that person up with talent into that role, but we'll put in a support network around it. And I think that support network is something that a lot of organizations don't consider. So let's put up people who have the talent, but let's put a sort of structure around them that allows them to succeed. Because if they don't succeed, and if they fail because they haven't got the support structure, you're kind of losing to the guys who are saying, oh, it wasn't the right person to choose for the role. The talent is there. We need to support that talent, and then we will get to a level playing field, and that's the target that we're aiming towards.
Thank you so much. And I think some of the points that you mentioned, Andrew, around, it's not a level playing field in the first place. The understanding of, not equality, but equity is really key there. And that's something that is, what brings it from the surface level understanding to actually being like, okay, this is the issue. What can I really do to own it and use my influence, use my power to make a change around it? So I think that's one. What you mentioned about, having that support system as well, very, very true, because, we talk a lot about the glass ceiling for women that, they can't advance and they have that, that barrier there. But sometimes when we talk about, token appointments or people, perhaps being put into a position where they don't have that support, there's a situation called the glass cliff, where they're put on the edge of the cliff and they have no support, nowhere to go. And, they don't feel supported or ready to be able to take on that journey. So like you said, bringing that environment on board, having that support there, really, really key to be able to advance those there. I saw that there was a question around, what firms in Japan manage gender equality well, and it has been answered in the chat. But I'd also like to say that the Dream Collective, we work a lot across a lot of different organizations, and specific to Japan, actually, we have published 2 books for International Women's Day, and there's a list of companies and leadership stories there for what's been happening in some of the Japanese companies. So I might recommend that you have a look through there. Thank you for that question. My question next is about the point, and really leading it into that topic that we have today around, bridging the gap between intent and action. So there was that research finding of 25% of Australians and 27% of Japanese men surveyed felt they had no impact on gender equality within their organization or to inspire and motivate their colleagues. What do you think are some of the ways that we can educate people on the crucial role that allyship plays? Might throw to Graeme first.
Thank you for that, Natsumi. I found it very interesting that the 2 numbers were pretty close together in both Japan and Australia. And one of the themes throughout this has been the fact that certain men feel threatened or disempowered. So again, a theme that we've been talking about is stories. And if you haven't picked it up already, I'm big on stories that can actually illustrate and resonate with people. So finding human interest stories that talk about how men have been involved in the empowerment of women and how it's proven successful. So getting men to tell those stories. I often tell stories myself of my early mentorship in my career. I was in the public sector for a little while before joining the private sector. And in both cases, I was mentored by very strong women. And I've had strong women in my life since I was a baby with my mother and a couple of strong aunties. So I've always sought a lot of inspiration and activism from the women around me to really use my position as a man of privilege in Australia. So white men of a certain age seem to have all of the power positions, at least in corporate Australia and also politically. So I think we have a responsibility to pass that power through the organisation and refer that to people to make change. And also, so it's not just policy, it's also doing things that make a difference. So for example, I rearranged my leadership team in Australia and New Zealand. I'm looking at doing something similar in Asia very soon to have more women who are the right person for the right job on the leadership team. I created an Office of Purpose, which has both men and women in it, and looks at things really. I call the Office of Purpose where it reports to me and includes diversity, inclusion, community giving, etc. I look for them to advise me on common threads to help with engagement. So for example, we've come up with the idea of having leave for volunteering. So community giving, we enable our employees to do that. And we give equal regard to issues that are important to either gender, for example. Back to what I was talking about before, where we changed some of the leave policies. We also give leave now to parents who are looking at surrogacy as a way to have children, men and women. That is something that we'll give equally. So it's a combination of finding stories where you've had success, and in circumstances where people feel disempowered or they can't find success or they have fatigue, helping them understand the organisation's there to help them, and also not diminish one group as you help another group rise.
Thanks, Graeme. And I think, what you mentioned is really making sure that there is that very robust understanding of intersectionality. It's not just this group and that group, but there's many layers to diversity. There's many ways that they intersect. So really making sure that you have that. And it does seem like some of the incentives, the initiatives that you mentioned in Fujitsu Australia is really tackling that head on as well. I might ask Andrew as well, and maybe a more of a personal question, because you did mention a lot about being a sponsor, having those very direct kind of messaging in place. For you, Andrew, like, what does being an ally for females and for women mean to you?
Yeah, it's a good question. It means a lot to me, first off, and the reason it means a lot to me is you get the opportunity to have a connection with someone, which is quite deep in terms of understanding how that person operates, the issues and challenges that they've had to get to where they are, and you feel like you're a teammate as opposed to a boss or a co-worker. You actually feel like you're on the same team, and that both of you succeeding is more important than just myself succeeding. I actually get I have a person who's currently commercial director for Lendlease Japan, and also a commercial director for data infrastructure for Asia. And no one really gave her much of a chance, but she was just incredibly smart, and you'd sit in meetings and think, oh God, her insights are better than all these blokes sitting around the table here. This isn't working. So just getting to understand and know that, and then being a real teammate, I feel of hers it sort of made me feel alive as in the world again, in terms of I've done a lot in business, but seeing this person rise to being able to create those pathways, and then seeing that success, and she'll take over from me, I'm pretty sure, in due course. She's a lot smarter than I am, and she's more well balanced than I am, but these are opportunities that she wouldn't have had. So I feel like I've done something good, and that doesn't make me a hero. It's opened my eyes to the fact that here's talent that wouldn't have reached this level if I hadn't done something about it. I feel like I've done something good. I think, you know, if you can do any good, whether you're male, female, or non-binary, whatever, it doesn't make a difference, right? It's just if you can do something good, you feel good, and you get to an age. I'm 50. I actually enjoy my kids' successes or people who work for me successes probably more than I do myself, to be honest. So just seeing that is so satisfying, and it makes me feel good. So yeah, that's probably a very simple answer, but yeah, it's the right thing to do.
It's all about the stories, Andrew, right? All about the stories.
Yeah. It is.
Exactly. Yes.
And also, sorry, Natsumi, what I see with Andrew there is a real authenticity as well. And that's something that's very important for leaders to show, a bit of humility and real authenticity. And that helps people on a cultural journey as well.
Definitely. And I think, you know, both of you today really have shared a lot of your personal stories, that authentic, you know, why you have that passion in this space, and both of you being very proactive allies in that space as well. I did see from the poll results that, you know, it seems like a lot of people, their organizations does include everybody in their gender equality initiatives, including men, which is great to see as well. And then it's really, now that they're included, the next step is how do we really engage that proactivity? How do we make sure that everybody, you know, understands how, you know, how to act and how to feel equipped to be an effective workplace ally? And both of you, Andrew, Graeme, you've mentioned a lot of initiatives around, you know, what you've done both at Lendlease and Fujitsu. But for organizations that maybe don't have any allyship initiatives or programs to support that in place, where would you recommend they start first? Maybe I'll throw to Graeme. Yeah.
I can go first if you like. Yeah. Allyship is critically important. You spoke about it earlier, Natsumi, and Andrew gave a very clear example of it. And I look to do that as well, but I'm just one person. But what we do is create an environment, and I seek mentorship. Even at this stage of my career, I felt that coming back to Australia after being overseas for 20 odd years, I had to get much smarter about Indigenous issues and women Indigenous issues, for example. And I now have a mentor who's a leader in the Indigenous community in Australia, who mentors me on how to create more safety in an organisation for Indigenous women and generally and women in general, because a lot of the experiences that Indigenous women have are having now are very similar to what women who imported into Australia have had in the last number of years. So learning across generations and across cultures is very important. But if you haven't started, I think my advice would be start at the top by listening. And it was interesting, again, another mentor of mine who I've known for many, many years said it's really, really simple to make, to start a journey or to accelerate a journey. And that is just creating an environment where you as a leader are willing to listen to stories. And she said to me that as senior executives, we're often in transmit mode. We're always trying to move ahead. We have opinions that we form, that we push through the organisation. We have actions that we take on a day-to-day basis to correct the course of an organisation. But we often are in transmit mode. We're not in receive mode. And she just said, think about transmit versus receive. Sit down with a group of women and listen to what they need. Listen and don't be afraid to hear about women's real needs, issues related to their health, safety, sexuality, and other things. And this crosses into other groups that don't identify as cisgender or are non-binary, people who have fluid identification, different cultural groups. Listen, understand, and then once you have that information, work with them to create an environment where you can model allyship. And Andrew gave a good example of that before. Also, reach out beyond your organisation. Every organisation I know now, whether large or small, has an ecosystem of partners, suppliers, etc. See what you can do there to perhaps reach outside your organisational boundaries to help or to give access to your power, and back to what I said before, refer your power to someone else, or show that you have a certain level of humility and willingness to learn. Many different tactics. There's no one answer, but if you can do a lot of those things and show a genuine desire to change and learn, no matter how big the organisation is, I think it can have an impact for underrepresented groups.
Thank you so much, Graeme. And what you touched upon is, we've been talking a lot in the research as well about, men and women, but actually really understanding that gender is a spectrum. It's not either or. It is very fluid, and there are certain intersectionalities in there. And like you said, not saying, okay, this is how it is and making assumptions and acting without listening, but actually hearing those people's lived experiences, understanding from them first, and then creating solutions, creating decisions from there is really the powerful way to go. Might throw to Andrew as well. This might be one of the last questions as well around that, the advice for organizations, but also I see a Q&A in the chat box as well, specific to the Japan market. Let me just check out. Yeah, so international organizations based in Japan, how can you approach this topic around gender equality with your local employees and Japanese clients, business partners, without disregarding the social and business culture in Japan? So I understand that Lendlease is a diverse workplace and based in Japan, working with Japanese clients. Would you be able to shed some light into how you tackle some of these situations and instances, Andrew?
Yeah, and maybe just touching on the first point, which was around how smaller organizations can improve what they're doing in this space. And I think Graeme really sort of nailed it in the listen and understand, and listen and understand. I mean, you can't say it enough. It's just, imagine taking on a new job, a new role, whatever that role is. What you first have to do is understand what that role is. You need to listen to people in the organization. You need to get feedback on what the situation is. You need to investigate. This is what you need to do anything new. You need to learn and understand. And so you can do that in various ways. I mean, joining something like this, AJBCC event, or in Japan we have the Australian New Zealand Chamber of Commerce. There's a plug there, but it's these sort of groups where you can actually listen to people from different organisations and get their viewpoints. The reason I go to a lot of the events is just to actually ask questions around. I'd love to meet Graeme face to face and ask him a whole bunch of questions. He's doing a whole bunch of great stuff. And then extract some of that, mold it into the organisation I'm in, and then get better outcomes. That's what you do. Listen and understand. In Japan, I find if you're an international company, you're treated differently. Now that's not ideal in some circumstances, but it also has some benefits, and it allows you to speak more freely. And rather than have to adhere to the social norms. Now, you must do it with respect, with great respect, and you want to build up the respect and loyalty to a customer and all that sort of stuff, so that they'll listen. But once you have that, you then can broach topics that often Japanese companies can't broach, and I think it's an opportunity to lead. And if you're a small organization, even it gives you a point of difference over other organizations, other Japanese organizations who aren't taking leadership. So I'd see it as an opportunity to take leadership in an area that maybe some other Japanese organizations, traditional Japanese organizations are behind on. And then it gives you a point of difference and an opportunity.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And we could all have these conversations for hours, I think, and you've provided so much insight, tangible action points, and these specific examples as well, both of you, in terms of what you've been doing in your careers, in your leadership style. So thank you, both Andrew and Graeme, for your authenticity, for your active proactive allyship in this space as well. So thank you so much for that. I did see a last question there around, the pandemic situation and how that's affected women's working styles in Japan. I might answer that from a perspective of how we've seen that in client engagements as well, is that it does actually provide now a layer of flexibility and interactiveness actually that wasn't there before in the way that Japan worked. I think remote work was almost non-existent pre-pandemic, but now it's become a more flexible, fluid workplace. So I do feel that that has actually encouraged women to take on more responsibility. What some stories that we've heard is some part-time people could now actually be full-time because they were allowed the leverage to do so during this time. So that's a bit of an insight from our end as well. The last poll question that you all saw around understanding and feeling equipped to be an effective workplace ally, I've seen that around half of the people that answered that question said yes, and then half are like no or somewhat. So I'd like to share before we part ways a bit of a resource that we do have at the Dream Collective here. So let me just close off by sharing my screen here. We have an online program, and this is a free e-learning program called Better Together. This focuses around building allyship in the workplace to educate, to create ways that you can support and empower individuals around allyship practices. So we'll be sharing a link in the chat box here. Take a look. It's a free self-paced learning program. It's a good way, like our last question around, where's the starting point, a good way to really educate yourself and put yourself into understanding more around the topic and around the current situation. We have both Japanese as well as English programs for this. I know that we're unfortunately coming up to time, but I'd like to thank the AJBCC, the team, Andrew, Graeme, and everybody tuning in live here today as well for your participation. I think it was a great, very interactive and insightful discussion. The Dream Collective, please stay connected. We have a global community on our social channels, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter in Japan as well. So we'd love for you, all of you, to be connected and stay tuned with some of the updates and conversations as well as and on the AJBCC side as well. I will stop there from my end and pass back to Veronica to close off the fifth session. But thank you again, Andrew and Graeme, for the discussion today. I really enjoyed it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, Natsumi. And from us here at AJBCC, a very warm thanks to you, Natsumi, for your really expert moderation, and to Graeme and to Andrew for being very candid in the way that you've shared your expertise. Lots of practical advice, including a lot of emphasis on listening and humility. Graeme, you also underscored the importance of stories, and I'd just note that we're in the process here together collectively of crafting our own stories. We've had terrific engagement for this webinar, both in attendance and also through the really good questions and comments that people have posted. So we'll certainly return to this topic in the future. But for today, thank you to you all for joining us, and most especially to Natsumi, Andrew, and Graeme.
Thank you so much.